You know, first impressions are very important. Whether it be a first date, a job interview, or the intro to a good book or movie, those first few moments where we experience someone or something for the first time can definitely shape how we're going to view it going forward. Thankfully, however, even if we fail at one aspect of something very hard, we can compensate for it by being good at something else. Case in point, Skyrim has a terrible opening sequence, but is an amazing game overall, especially for its time. In fact, the intro segment of this game is so terrible that one of the most popular mods to play with this game is one that lets you skip the tutorial segment of this game entirely in order to start somewhere else. And I figured it was about time someone took a deep dive onto this early segment of the game, from when you wake up in the carriage to the moment you escape Helgen, and see what exactly went wrong here. Because while I'm sure some of you down in the comments are about to type, "It's too long, that's the problem," I for one believe there's more to the story than just that. So grab yourselves a snack and get comfortable, because this one's gonna be a doozy. How yin's doing? I'm Ian, and this is a critical analysis of Skyrim's introductory and tutorial segments. Let's get into it. As we go through this video, I will be trying to look at the entirety of the early segments of the game through the perspective of three different kinds of players. Individuals who have never played an Elder Scrolls game before, individuals who have played previous Elder Scrolls games but not Skyrim, and players who have already beaten Skyrim before and are starting a new run. And I can't help but feel like Bethesda actively dislikes people who try to replay their games from the start, because, good lord, these intro segments take way too long. Case in point, the carriage ride. Pretty sure everyone watching this video already knows how Skyrim starts, but just to refresh everyone's memory, you start by waking up in a carriage and then having NPCs talk to you. For the entire duration of this carriage ride and conversation, you won't be able to do anything other than look around. This wouldn't be so terrible if it weren't for two major problems. First of all, the scenery outside of the carriage is extremely boring and uninteresting. It's just mountains, pine trees, and snow. The second major issue is that the conversation being held in the carriage with you is not terribly interesting. You wake up, and the guy sitting across from you starts talking to you, saying how you are trying to cross the border into Skyrim, where the game takes place, and then got caught in an Imperial ambush with everyone else in the carriage with you. This part of the conversation works rather well from a role-playing perspective, since it effectively creates a blank slate for your character. This means the character you play as in Skyrim is effectively the ultimate blank slate for you to project whatever you want onto. There's even a completely random horse thief put in a carriage alongside you. This horse thief holds effectively two roles inside the carriage. Firstly, he shows off how the Empire was effectively being rather haphazard in their arrest of the Stormcloaks. This goes to show that your character didn't necessarily do anything wrong or illegal when they were arrested by the Imperials. He also effectively acts as something akin to an audience surrogate at this point in the game, because all we can do is move our camera around. We don't actually get any dialogue options here. This means the horse thief is effectively a key to get the other characters in the cart to exposition dump the information that the devs want you to hear. Case in point, the horse thief asks who the guy sitting next to you with their mouth gagged is, where it is revealed that they are the leader of the Stormcloak Rebellion. There are several narrative problems here. First of all, we are a character who has just woken up to this world and has no idea what's going on. If you played previous Elder Scrolls games such as Oblivion or Morrowind, you'll know who the Empire is, but the Stormcloak Rebellion is not something that shows up in previous Elder Scrolls games whatsoever. It's something that sprung up between the events of Elder Scrolls 4 and Elder Scrolls 5. Same story with the Thalmor that get mentioned later in the carriage ride. They didn't exist in previous Elder Scrolls games, they showed up between the events of Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim. This means individuals who didn't already play through Skyrim before have absolutely no idea what's going on in this conversation. So when the guy sitting across from you in a carriage says, "I don't know where we're going, but Sovngarde awaits," the average new player is going to be too busy questioning what a Sovngarde even is to realize that the carriage is leading us to our execution platform. And that's assuming that players are still actually paying attention to what's going on around them at this point, because I'll be honest with you, a lot of us have probably already left the room to make a sandwich, use the bathroom, or take care of other business around the house while we wait for the cutscene to finish playing and let us actually get into the game. Because Skyrim's introductory moments are kind of like a bad public school teacher. It just kind of assumes you're going to act in exactly the way they want you to, and doesn't really have a meaningful plan for when that doesn't happen. As a result, the rest of the carriage ride is effectively the horse thief and rail off your carriage buddy, effectively exposition dumping a bunch of different names with no meaningful context. A perfect example of this would be the Thalmor, who are apparently meeting with the general. The Thalmor are just like the Stormcloaks in the sense that it doesn't matter if you're a new player to the Elder Scrolls franchise, or if you've played previous Elder Elder Scrolls games before, you have no idea who these people are because, again, they didn't exist in previous Elder Scrolls games. They're something that showed up after the events of Elder Scrolls 4. And given how, from a lore perspective, they're actually relatively important to the game's story, it's kind of annoying how they kind of gloss over them so rapidly throughout the game, so allow me to explain it rather simply. After the events of the previous Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, a bunch of elven supremacists took over the High Elves' homeland of the Somerset Isles and then declared war on the Empire. The Empire was able to fight them off, but only by the skin of their teeth, and because of this, the peace treaty they signed was a bit one-sided in the Thalmor's favor. As a result of this, the Empire was forced to make multiple concessions, the most important of which in regards to the events of Skyrim being the outlawing of the worship of Tiber Septim, or Talos as he's more commonly referred to. And it's because of this one specific concession that the Stormcloaks are rebelling, because the worship of Talos is extremely popular in Skyrim, to the point where people are willing to fight for independence in order to keep the worship of him legal. But instead of trying to explain any of this to new players who don't know what's going on in the world around them, they've instead decided to have the horse thief pray to the gods while the guy sitting across from us wonders whether or not that friend they have in this town is still making mead the way they used to. After which, they finally park the carriage and we can get out and start creating our character. The character creator itself, in terms of how it physically functions, is perfectly serviceable enough for what we're doing in this game. My only real gripe with it is when it comes into play, because once you're done deciding what your starting race and physical appearance are going to be in this game, a priest starts giving out your last rites, and then people's heads start to get chopped off. Given that we just spent who knows how many hours tweaking our nose and other facial features to be exactly the way we like it, we all know that our character isn't about to be physically killed right here and now. This means when the dragon finally comes in to interrupt our execution, the first thought going through a player is not, oh thank goodness, it's more along the lines of, about fucking time. I think the best way to fix this issue is to simply have the character creator occur once our hands are unbound and get to actually play the game properly, instead of midway through the most railroady segment of the entire game. But honestly, that is just a minor nitpick to what is frankly the biggest issue with this entire execution sequence. You see, the biggest decision you can possibly make in this game is who you're siding with in the Civil War. This is because the two factions of the Civil War are mutually exclusive questlines. You either do one, or you do the other. And this is a pretty big deal because unlike other mutually exclusive decisions you can make in this game, it actually affects something other than what your quest reward is going to be. And how is this decision presented to you at the start of the game? Well, you have the Stormcloak rebels, who are relatively friendly to you on the carriage right here, and the Empire, who tried to kill you before you gained full control of your character, and only failed to do so because the final boss of the game decided to show up and destroy the tutorial. This means, realistically, the overwhelming majority of players are going to side with the Stormcloaks on their first playthrough, because, sure, the Stormcloaks can be a bit racist in their capital city and are treating the Dark Elves and Argonians there like crap, but at least they didn't try to kill me. Cause I don't know about you, but I'm going to side with the racist over the guy who tried to kill me 10 times out of 10. And this would have been such an easy thing to fix, too. I mean, think about it. When you're done with the character creator, they'll actually explicitly state that you're not on the list of people that need to be executed today. To which the captain standing next to the guy with the list says, forget the list, they go to the block. And there's never a proper explanation on why the captain seems so hellbent on having you specifically killed. Personally, I like to roleplay it as they're my character's ex-wife, but to be perfectly honest, if I was the one writing this scene, I'd make it so that when your head is on the chopping block, instead of having the dragon intervene to stop your execution, they actually have the guy holding the list come in to General Tullius and be like, wait, stop, he's not on the list, we don't need to kill him. Then the general will look at the list, realize he's right, and then order you to not be executed before then the dragon can show up and interrupt everything. Hell, if you still want to have the dragon show up and prevent our execution, you can actually have the aforementioned Captain Bitch push the executioner aside, take the axe, and then raise it, only to be interrupted by a aforementioned dragon attack. But sadly, none of this is what actually happens. Instead, we simply have our head put on the chopping block, and then a dragon shows up to interrupt our execution because the plot demands we actually get to play the game here. Afterwards, we run into a nearby tower with some of the Stormcloaks, where the final boss of the game will politely open a door on the second floor, allowing us to jump into a burning building in order to progress the tutorial. Once we're out of the burning building, we'll see the list keeper trying to evacuate some civilians to safety, and telling us that we should actually follow him if we want to live. The devs even made sure there'd be a quest marker sticking over his head to kind of tell you that you're supposed to follow him in order to progress the story here. But in all realisticness, all players are just going to notice that their hands are still bound and they can't interact with the world whatsoever, and will just start sprinting ahead what they think is the correct path in order to progress the story until they can actually play the game properly. So you run through some buildings and past some archers and battle mages shooting at the dragon, and then rush into the nearby building. Interestingly, if you follow the quest markers like the developers intended, you'll actually see a confrontation between the guy who was holding the list and the guy who was sitting across from you in the carriage. And this entire confrontation can pretty much be summarized as both parties verbally flipping the other off and then telling you that you should follow them through different doors into the same building. But I'm gonna be honest with you here, it took me years to realize that it was possible to side with the Imperials because I didn't actually follow the quest markers. I just rushed through the first door I saw, which was the bigger of the two, which is also the one that the Stormcloaks go through. And I know for a fact that I am not alone in this perspective. I'm willing to say a majority of players on their first time playing through this game didn't even realize there was an option to escape Helgen with the Imperials. But once we're inside, the guy we decided to go in with will cut our bindings loose and we can finally start playing the game properly. Once our bindings are set loose and we can properly control our character at last, the game will give us a pop-up explaining what button we need to press in order to pick up items and add them to our inventory. If we decide to escape with the Imperials, we'll be able to loot the barracks first. Inside this barracks, you'll find a few gold coins, some iron swords, and the same armor that the guy you entered the building with is currently wearing. Less importantly, there's also a key to Helgen Keep in one of the chests. If you forgot to pick up this key, don't worry. The NPC you entered the building with will pick it up for you and then open the associated door. Once you're done looting the room, head on ahead and you'll see a gate in the way. The NPC you're traveling with will mention that there are Stormcloaks on the other side of the gate and that we might be able to reason with them. But this is a foolhardy notion on his end, since once you pull the lever to lower the gate and head into the room with the two Stormcloaks, they will attack you on sight. But if you decide to enter the building with the Stormcloaks instead of the Imperial soldiers, you'll actually enter through this room instead of the barracks. Once inside, the carriage companion we met earlier will undo our bindings and tell us to loot the dead body next to us. From here, the game will give us all the time we need to figure out how navigating the menu and equipping items we just picked up works, by having our carriage companion check the doors to see if he can figure out how to get one of them open, only to deduce that one is locked and the other one is unable to be opened from this side. Thankfully, this secondary doorway is actually the same gate I mentioned earlier when we decided to enter the building through the Imperial side. And, thankfully for us, someone is about to come through this gate in order to open it up for us so that we're not just stuck in this room forever. And you're not gonna believe who it is. That's right, it's our ex-wife in the flesh, Captain Bitch. Turns out if you side with the Stormcloaks in the tutorial, she finds her way into the barracks alongside the List Keeper, and once the gate is opened, she will attack you on sight. Thankfully, our carriage companion seems to have more brain cells than the List Keeper, since instead of thinking that we can talk this one out, he'll tell us to crouch down and hide and wait to ambush them once the gate is opened. Regardless if we do this or not, however, a 2v2 fight between the Imperial soldiers and you and your carriage companion is inevitable. Interestingly, if you really feel like it, you can head down the hallway the Imperials came down once the gate is opened, and then loot the barracks you would have entered the building through if you had sided with the Imperials at this point in the tutorial. So you're not really missing out on any loot here. If you really want anything in the barracks, it is entirely accessible to you regardless of who you sided with at this point in the game. But to be perfectly honest, the gear in the barracks is so completely worthless that it's not worth heading back to get. And to be perfectly honest, if you just want good armor, Captain Bitch is wearing the best set of armor you're going to be able to find in a tutorial. And the sword she's wielding ain't too shabby either. But if for whatever reason you decide not to pick up the key off of Captain Bitch's body, don't worry. Rayloff, your carriage companion, will loot the key off her body instead and then use it to open the other door. From here, the distinction between who you decide to escape Helgen with during the tutorial is purely cosmetic. If you sided with the Stormcloaks, you'll be fighting Imperial soldiers on your way out, while if you decide to side with the Imperials, you'll be fighting Stormcloaks instead. A perfect example of this is what happens in the kitchen. You see, as you get through the aforementioned locked door with the key you got from either Captain Bitch or a chest in the barracks, you'll find the hallway collapse in front of you, and you'll be forced to travel through the kitchen in order to progress through the tutorial. Inside this kitchen will be two hostile NPCs. If you side with the Stormcloaks, they'll be wearing the same equipment as Captain Bitch and her List Keeper, but if you side with the Imperials, it'll be two Stormcloak soldiers wielding two-handed weapons. Regardless of who exactly is in here, they will be hostile and you will need to kill them, after which you are free to loot the kitchen for potions and food. While one might suspect that you're going to need to use these potions at some point during the tutorial, in my experience this is never the case, because you start the game with a basic healing spell already learned. Still, it's always nice to have an alternative way to heal yourself when you run out of magicka, so I have no complaints on this part of the tutorial. The next segment, however, has as many nitpicks on my end as it has lockpicks to give. For you see, once you're out of the kitchen, you'll have to travel to the Torturer's Chambers. Inside the Torturer's Chambers, you'll see the Torturer himself shooting lightning like Emperor Palpatine with his assistant swinging a mace at two Stormcloak soldiers. Naturally, if you decide to escape Helgen with the Stormcloaks, you'll have to kill the Torturer and his assistant. Meanwhile, if you decide to escape Helgen with the Listkeeper, you'll have to kill the 2 Stormcloaks who are assaulting the Torturer for torturing their fellow Stormcloaks. And I find it very odd that they have a torture chamber here. Because, again, one of the biggest decisions you can make in the entire game is deciding between the Imperials or the Stormcloaks. So we have to decide between the Imperials, who resort to torture to get what they want, as well as having tried to kill us earlier today, or the Stormcloak rebels, who at this point in the game haven't done anything wrong in our eyes. I mean, technically you could argue that the Stormcloaks would have tried to kill us if we tried to escape with the Listkeeper instead of Rayloff by this point in the game, but let's be honest, it's entirely reasonable for the developers to assume that we were wearing Imperial armor at this point in the game and that the Stormcloaks attacked us because they couldn't tell us apart from actual Imperial soldiers. After we either saved or killed the Torturer, we'll get a bit of a lockpicking tutorial where we'll see a dead mage in one of the torture cells. If we decide to bother with the trivially easy task of lockpicking this cell door open, we'll be rewarded not only with the mage robes that are on the dead body, which can be quite useful for magic-oriented characters, but also a spellbook. This is the spellbook for the spell known as Sparks. It's the same spell you saw the Torturer using against the Stormcloaks earlier. It lets you shoot lightning out of your fingertips like Emperor Palpatine to electrocute your foes to death. This acts as a functional tutorial on how learning new spells in the game works, but I do have a few gripes with it. First of all, if you chose the Dark Elf as your starting race in this game, you would already know the Spark spell long before you found this spellbook. Meaning this basic tutorial on how to learn new spells won't work the way it's supposed to if you pick the Dark Elf as your starting race. Another major problem here is how you start the game with a basic Flame spell. This spell works identically to the Spark spell, except instead of shooting lightning out of your fingertips, you're shooting fire, as the name would imply. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you here. The Flame spell is ultimately superior to the Lightning spell in basically every way, especially this early on in the game. This is because the Flame spell not only has a lower magicka cost, meaning you can cast it for longer, but it has better damage since it does the same base damage. But instead of damaging the magicka pool of the target you're hitting, it'll do a damage over time effect instead, meaning your overall DPS is going to be extremely superior to that of a Spark spell. And while there are enemies in the game that resist fire damage, none of them are going to be showing up here in the tutorial. While I understand the idea here was to have a Torturer demonstrate a new spell and then have you learn that new spell to try out for yourself, I personally think it would have been a better idea to have a different spellbook in the cage with the dead mage. Personally, I would have put the Oak Flesh spell here. That way players can retain their overall durability even if they decide to swap out their armor for the mage's robes. Or at the very least, they could have made sure that none of the starting races start with the exact same spell they're teaching you how to learn new spells with in the tutorial. But regardless if you decide to loot the mage's cage or not, you'll need to progress to the next room. If you side with the Stormcloaks, anyone who survived the battle with the Torturer will help you with the fight up ahead. Meanwhile, if you decide to side with the Imperials, the Torturer's assistant will come along with you, while the Torturer will insist to stay behind. From here, you'll head down a long, narrow hallway full of cages full of corpses, until eventually you find a large room full of NPCs that will attack you on sight and be wearing the faction armor that you didn't side with earlier. Effectively, this is just a giant combat encounter in order to allow you to experiment with the different ways you can fight in the game in order to get a feel for what you want to do on your playthrough. Want to use melee weapons? Time to go Unga Bunga on these guys. Want to use magic? Well, those archers are standing in a puddle of very flammable liquid, and you started the game with a basic fire spell, so put 2 and 2 together, champ. Want to figure out how archery works in this game? Well, there are some archers in here that you can kill and loot. Why not give that a try? But regardless of how you go about this combat encounter, once everything is said and done, the NPCs who survive the battle with you will say that they're going to stay behind. If you sided with the Stormcloaks, they'll say it's because they want to go look for their leader Ulfric, while the Torturer's assistant will say that they need to get back to their boss. But regardless of which of these scenarios is playing out, you and either the Listkeeper or your carriage companion will travel on ahead, and then a cave-in will block your way back the way you came and force you to go down the cave and start your journey into becoming a stealth archer for the upteenth time. As we inevitably continue on ahead through the cave, we'll be forced to fight some frostbite spiders. If you decide to loot the bow and arrow from the archers from the previous combat encounter, you'll be able to shoot at these spiders like fish in a barrel. Otherwise, you're gonna have to go fight them the old-fashioned way like we did with everyone else so far in this tutorial. Just keep in mind these spiders are poisonous and will do damage over time if they hit you. Also keep in mind there are 2 giant ones waiting to drop in and ambush you once you enter the room. If this is your first time playing Skyrim and you're not completely used to the combat just yet, don't worry. Your carriage companion or list keeper, whichever one you decide to enter the building with, will follow you into this cave before the cave-in blocks out the way you came in with. This is rather helpful since they are marked as essential at this point in the game, meaning they cannot be physically killed. This means your tour guide through the tutorial is functionally an immortal bodyguard that you can use as a meat shield for whenever things get too dicey for you. Something that surely proved quite invaluable so far to any new players who are still trying to get the ropes on the combat system. But regardless if you use your immortal companion to help you fight the spiders or not, what's next up ahead is a sleeping bear you'll need to get past. Assuming you didn't leave your immortal NPC companion behind a while ago at this point, which if this is a repeat playthrough you almost certainly did, they'll give you a stealth archery tutorial by giving you a bow and some arrows and telling you to crouch down and shoot the bear while it's asleep. After this, just continue along down the cave until you see the exit. Once you've gotten out of the cave, you're free to wander off in any which way you want throughout the whole of Skyrim, really, but most players will typically have no idea where they're going and just follow the guidance of the NPC you escaped Helgen with. If you decide to do this, they'll take you along the road to the town of Riverwood. They'll then introduce you to their next of kin and explain to them what happened in Helgen. After they've done this, said next of kin will give you a key to their house and some free stuff and ask you to go and inform the local Jarl about what's going on here so that they can send some sort of reinforcements to keep the citizens here safe in case the dragon shows up, thus kicking off the main story. If you sided with the Imperials, this next of kin NPC that causes you to start off the main quest will be the local blacksmith, but if you sided with the Stormcloaks, it'll actually be the head of the local lumber mill. I find the Stormcloaks to be the better of the two options for repeat playthroughs because you don't actually have to sit around and wait for the conversation to end in order to get your free stuff as quickly as possible. This is because the conversation where they explain what happened in Helgen occurs outside instead of inside a house with a loading screen. This means if you sided with the Stormcloaks, you'll be able to ignore the conversation about what you just saw in Helgen with a dragon attack and start shooting lightning at mud crabs in the river and have some fun here while they progress the main story for you. Meanwhile, if you go inside the blacksmith's house, you're gonna have to wait till the conversation ends before you can start looting the place to make sure it doesn't count as stealing. And that pretty much sums up what I would consider the tutorial segment of Skyrim. So what can we take away from all this? Well, for one, it's safe to assume that from a writing perspective, whoever was making this tutorial had a heavy Stormcloak bias or was completely incompetent as a writer. Because think about it, one of the biggest decisions in this entire game is the decision between whether we side with the Stormcloaks or the Empire in this civil war. And during this tutorial sequence, we see the Empire actively try to kill us on at least one occasion, as well as practicing torture to get what they want in direct violation of the Geneva suggestion. Meanwhile, on the other side, we have the Stormcloak rebels who, in the eyes of the player, haven't actually done anything wrong at this point in the game. In fact, I'm willing to bet a lot of the people who are playing this game for the first time are making Star Wars connections thinking Rebels versus Evil Empire. In fact, pretty much every argument I have seen in favor of the Imperials over the Stormcloaks can pretty much boil down to two kinds of arguments. The first is a bunch of lore nerds espousing different details about the world outside of Skyrim, arguing that the Empire is a necessary force to have in order to deal with the Nazi Thalmor. And while I don't necessarily disagree with this argument, it's not a very good one since it requires people to go out of their way to find this information on their own, meaning your average casual player of this game will never find out about it. The second, and frankly better argument in my opinion, is pointing out the blatant racism going on with the Stormcloaks. Case in point, if you set foot in their capital city of Windhelm, you'll immediately see some drunkards being racist against the Dark Elves. But honestly, this should have been better conveyed inside the tutorial by having the Stormcloaks you meet actually being racist towards you if you weren't playing a Nord yourself. This would have made the entire quandary between Imperials and Stormcloaks one with actual nuance in it whatsoever, rather than just a Rebels versus Evil Empire vibe that's being conveyed here in the tutorial. And this just goes to foreshadow one of the biggest issues with Skyrim's narrative: its cognitive dissonance between the story and the actual gameplay. This is because the story is written in a rather linear fashion, implying that you're always in a sense of urgent rushing from one place to the next to deal with the dragon crisis. Meanwhile, in reality, you can just run off into the sunset to pick flowers, catch butterflies, brew potions, do completely different questlines that have nothing to do with the main story, and realistically just do whatever the hell you want. The open world of Bethesda games are effectively a giant amusement park, and I just wish the main story would reflect that instead of pretending like they have any actual control over the player's actions as they inevitably get distracted from the main quest and do various side quests along the way. And honestly, it hurts to see them do this because in previous Elder Scrolls games, they did this much better. The previous Elder Scrolls games of Daggerfall and Morrowind are the best examples of this. With Daggerfall, you simply create your character, and then you wake up in a cave after a shipwreck, where then you can progress through the game as you see fit. In fact, it's entirely possible to fail the main story by ignoring the Emperor's letters asking if you're still alive. Meanwhile, in Morrowind, you get off a boat, fill out some release papers where you create your character, and then you're free to go wherever, but you're given some papers and told to meet an NPC in Balmora in order to progress the plot. And once you meet up with this NPC and get the main story started, he doesn't tell you to help go along the main quest to save the world or anything. He says, "Welcome to the Blades, we're the Emperor's spy network, now go get yourself a cover story by doing some side quests." And I just wish the main story had some moments like this, where they just say, "Hey, it's a big open world, go do some side quests," instead of implying a false sense of urgency that realistically doesn't exist in the story whatsoever. I know you want me to rush ahead to Kynesgrove in order to move the story, but I will get sidetracked with 20 different side quests and ignore the plot completely. Screw you, Delphine, I got Best Boy Barbarous here to help out. But that's gonna be all for now. Be sure to like this video if you did, subscribe if you don't want to miss the next video I make, comment what you want to see me cover in the future. I've been Ian, you have been you, and this has been a critical analysis of Skyrim's tutorial. Thank you for watching.